I was going to let this slide. I wasn't going to cover it on the daily cancellation, but then I realized that the entire reason I do a daily cancellation, canceling someone every single day, is that I don't believe in letting anything or anyone slide ever. And so I must cancel, probably not for the first time, Amanda Gorman. Now, for those blessedly unfamiliar with Miss Gorman, maybe you haven't heard me complain about her in the past, she is tragically, horrifically, the most famous and celebrated poet in the country. She has performed her poetry at Joe Biden's inauguration. She's performed it at the Super Bowl. She's been showered with praise and critical acclaim. She's written best-selling books of poetry. She was the first person to ever win the title of National Youth Poet Laureate. She was listed by Time magazine as one of the most influential people in America. She has reached a level of success that relatively few poets in the history of the world have ever reached, and one that poets in the modern world basically never reach at all. And the problem is that her poetry is very, very, very bad. Her poetry, by all rights, would not win a fourth grade poetry contest. It's the kind of poetry that, if written and submitted for a grade by like a child in high school, it would earn a C- at best, if not a failing grade and a concerned note home to her parents. She is terrible at poetry. Her poetry is so abysmal that it doesn't even qualify as poetry. But that hasn't stopped her from being celebrated as the greatest poet alive today, and it didn't stop her from performing at the DNC this week. Now, before we listen to her latest piece, I'll tell you ahead of time what you already know, which is that the media loved it. She was praised effusively, but then again, of course, she could stand on stage and read from her CVS receipt, and she would be praised effusively, so that doesn't say much. But with that set up, let's watch the performance that breathless media headlines have described variously as captivating, powerful, passionate, and otherworldly. Here is Amanda Gorman with her new poem titled, "This Sacred Scene."
We gather at this hallowed place because we believe in the American dream.
Okay, let's stop there for a moment. Two problems quickly. First, she called it a hallowed place, which is actually is a powerful and poetic description. I was there myself. I mean, it was indeed hollow in both a spiritual and intellectual way, but she didn't mean to say hollowed. We can assume that she meant to say hallowed. I mean, the title of this poem is This Sacred Scene, so hallowed would fit the title. It would not, however, fit the event she's trying to describe. What exactly is hallowed about the United Center Arena in Chicago? It's a fine arena, like it gets the job done. I mean, the outside is terrible. It smells like fecal matter everywhere, by the way, in Chicago. Can I just tell you, especially around that arena? I don't know if it's because if it's, probably a bunch of Democrats are in town. There's always a bunch of Democrats there. But anyway, I would stop well short of hallowed to describe it, is what I'm saying. So the arena is not sacred. And a political convention itself is not only not sacred, but is one of the least sacred things I can possibly imagine. Especially a convention that has a drive-through line for abortions outside. So we're one line into this thing, and already she's using the wrong word, which is actually the right word, while the right word is actually the wrong word. So we're all kinds of confused, but let's keep listening.
We face a race that tests if this country we cherish shall perish from the earth, and if our earth shall perish from this country.
I'm not going to keep interrupting, but I do have to just pause again just to say one thing, which is what? This is a race that tests if this country we cherish shall perish from the earth, and if our earth shall perish from this country? What? What is that supposed to mean, Amanda? How can the earth perish from the country? Perish from the earth is not a phrase that you can reverse and still retain any meaning. It's like saying, we will find out if the house is going to burn down or if the down is going to burn house, which is a phrase that I guess you can also turn into poetry by saying with very serious tone and pausing for dramatic effect. But let's give her the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe she was trying to say that if the race doesn't go their way, the earth will be killed by our country. It will perish from our country, as in like the way that something would perish from cancer. Which is just, it's a really confusing and clunky way of putting it. And it also makes no sense on multiple levels. For one thing, our country isn't killing the earth. No country is killing the earth. But if any country was killing the earth, it'd be a country in Asia, maybe like a country like China, not us. Second, if losing the election means that the country is going to perish, which is what you said at the beginning of that line, then how can the earth also perish because of the country? The country is gone, I thought. It perished. How can it kill the earth when it no longer exists? Which is it, Amanda? Is the country going to kill the earth, or is the earth going to... Which is it? You're not making any sense. If you're going to recite the most rote, banal, simpleton poetry of all time, the least you could do is have it make sense. This is the worst of all worlds. It's boring, cliched, trite, and also incoherent, which is an impressive feat. Continue.
It falls to us to ensure that we do not fall, for a people that cannot stand together cannot stand at all. We are one family, regardless of religion, class, or color. For what defines a patriot is not just our love of liberty, but our love for one another. This is loud in our country's call because while we all love freedom, it is love that frees us all.
Yeah, just stop it. I can't. I got to tell you, slam poets on like the hierarchy of artists, they are below ventriloquists and mimes. That's how low on the totem pole they are. They're below porn stars, okay? It's like ventriloquists, mimes, porn stars, and then slam poets, all the way at the bottom of the artistic rankings. So I must insist again that this is not poetry. There is no real rhythm. There's only sporadic rhymes. No metaphors are being used. No evocative imagery. She isn't finding poetic ways of expressing her ideas. She's just stating them plainly and in the least imaginative language that she can. The whole thing is absolutely pockmarked with cliches. Cliche is the death of poetry, and literally every single line of this god-awful travesty masquerading as a poem has a cliche or is a cliche. So this is just a political speech. The only thing making this a poem instead of a speech is that she's reciting it in a slightly halting way. But if that's all that's required to make poetry, then every speech Joe Biden has given for the past 5 years is poetry. Now, granted, I don't claim to be a poetry expert. Far from it. But I think that's why I'm a pretty reliable judge of these things, because my first litmus test for good poetry is this. Could I have come up with that? And Amanda Gorman has never penned a single line, not a single one, that would make any halfway intelligent person say, wow, how did she come up with that? Mind-blowing. How did she think to phrase it that way? So take this line, for example. We are one family, regardless of religion, class, or color. For what defines a patriot is not just our love of liberty, but our love for one another. There's nothing even remotely clever about those lines. It is an utterly bland collection of platitudes. It's not interesting. It's not beautiful. It's not poetic. This is the stuff of a campaign speech delivered by a high school sophomore running for student government. It is boring, hackneyed. It's bad. I hate it. I hate it so much. But that line is actually a brilliant bit of wordsmithing compared to this clunky, lumbering hunk of 8th grade vocabulary words. Quote, empathy emancipates, making us greater than hate or vanity. That's the American promise, powerful and pure. Divided we cannot endure, but united we can endeavor to humanize our democracy and endear democracy to humanity. I mean, that is vapid, stale, and so awkwardly worded. It lacks any resemblance of rhythm, grace, wit. I want to vomit reading sentences like these. I might throw up on camera right now just from reading those sentences. That's how bad the sentences are. We can endeavor to humanize our democracy. Leave aside the fact that it doesn't make any sense, right? The message doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't even sound good. It doesn't flow. Endeavor to humanize is a combination of words that should never appear in a poem ever, under any circumstance. It's ugly. It sounds ugly. And there's no artistry in using those words in that combination. And that is, again, entirely putting aside the fact that humanizing democracy is an incoherent concept. So it's just bad all around. I hate it very much. Very, very much. Now, you might think that I'm overreacting. And sure, it's terrible poetry. Sure, it's relentlessly cliched and corny. Sure, the poem is so bad that it probably causes cancer. But what's the big deal? You might say. There's a lot of bad poetry out there. True enough. But the fact that this kind of poetry is so revered and so celebrated means not that poetry is dead or that art is dead. It means something worse. That we are rapidly losing our ability to identify good art when we see it. So I don't have any contempt for Amanda Gorman just because she's a terrible poet. I want to make that clear. That's not her fault. And I'm sure she's a nice person, right? And she thinks that she's a great poet because that's what she's been told. She's been told that since she was like 10, right? The first time she wrote "Roses are red, violets are blue," everyone's like, "Oh my God, what? How did you come up with that?" And so her whole life, she thought, like, I'm an amazing poet because that's all anyone's ever told her. So I don't even really blame her. I don't. I have instead seething contempt for all of the people in the audience who listen to this bilge and applaud and say, "That's incredible. Did you hear how she said we should endeavor to humanize democracy?" I mean, just what? Beautiful, beautiful language, stunning. Those are the people that I blame for this. They are the reason that art really will die in this country, not because people stop making great art, but because everyone else can't even recognize great art anymore. That's the tragedy here. Not that Amanda Gorman, as awful as she is, may be the best poet in the country, but it's that she definitely isn't the best. Yet she's good enough for so many people. They turn their back on art to guzzle this sludge instead. And so that is why Amanda Gorman and all of the people who applaud and praise her are all today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.